everyone. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda McCarthy, sports dietitian and program coordinator with Children's Hospital Colorado Sports Medicine Center. Today, we are going to be doing a Thanksgiving recipe that's got lots of different root vegetables in it, good carbohydrate sources, lots of flavor. So I'm hoping that we've got a really nice healthy recipe idea for you to take to your Thanksgiving table this fall. So we're going to get started with just chopping everything and getting everything ready. But as a reminder, the first thing we want to do whenever we're preparing a recipe for ourselves or other people is wash our hands. So I'm going to go over here to the side. Whenever you're washing your hands, it's really important to scrub in between. Sorry, you can't see me very well. Scrub your hands the entire time. Sing happy birthday twice while you're scrubbing with soap, and then dry off thoroughly with a clean towel. This helps us to prevent foodborne illness in our home, which is actually the #1 source of foodborne illness that we see. So you might think that it comes more from restaurants, but oftentimes we're the ones that are getting ourselves sick. So we wash our hands. Next, we're going to go ahead and get the oven started so it's preheated for us. We're going to turn the oven to 350 and go ahead and get that started so that it's warm by the time we need it. Now, this recipe is a vegetable stuffing. So we're going to be using a variety of different veggies and some things to add some more flavor to it. So some of our ingredients include our Brussels sprouts. We're going to be using sweet potatoes as well as squash. Now with this recipe, you can really use any variety of squash. I have chosen butternut today, and I'll tell you why. There's a specific reason for that. But you could also do acorn. You could use spaghetti squash. It's just going to change the texture of the finished recipe. I would probably recommend acorn or butternut as your two best options with this recipe. We've also got our spices. We have sage, thyme, and basil as our spices for this one. We've got some broth. We're going to be using vegetable broth. You could also use chicken broth if you had that instead. And then we've got a loaf. I am using French bread today. I have to admit, I'm being a little bit flexible here because ideally I wanted a loaf of really nice, crusty whole grain bread, but the grocery store is sold out of that. So sometimes we have to improvise. So today I'm going to be using French bread. The recommendation for whole grains is to get half of your grains from whole grains on a daily basis. So we're still getting lots of fiber from this recipe from our vegetables. So I'm really not concerned that we're going to be using a white bread product, and it's going to get really crispy and give us some really good flavor in this recipe. And then our other ingredients, we're going to be using olive oil. We're going to be using a little bit of butter or margarine. You can choose which one you prefer. And then we've got an onion here as well. So we're going to get started with the chopping in this recipe. So this one, we're going to start with the Brussels sprouts and the onion. So for the onion, I like to cut the top and bottom of it off of it first, excuse me. And we only need half of this red onion. So we're just going to slice it in half and set the rest over to the side here. So with the onion, you want to peel the skin off of the outside, the like papery piece. Tastes really terrible if you get a bite of that in your recipe. So we want to make sure we've removed all of that. And the skin is really on there tight. So, okay. And what we're going to do is just dice this up. So I like to hold it to where all of the pieces are together and just slice it into about 1/2 inch pieces to start. And then we're going to turn it the opposite direction and cut it again in about 1/2 inch pieces. So we've got these really nice kind of square pieces of onion you can see there. So we're going to be roasting these vegetables to start. So you can go ahead and take that and just kind of spread it out across on your sheet pan. So I've just got a baking pan here, and we're going to be using that to soften up these vegetables before we put them in the casserole dish. Onion is great. It's got that really pungent smell. Actually, I'm really happy that this onion isn't making me cry too much right now while we're filming. But whenever you do have a really strong onion that is making you teary and it's really hard to get through cutting it, that smell is actually what's called organosulfides. It's really protective of the GI tract. So it's really, really healthy for us to be eating. It just makes it really hard for us to cut in the meantime. Next ingredient we need to chop are our Brussels sprouts. So we can pour out a few of those. We're going to be using 2 cups of Brussels sprouts. And I like to just have these. Now, I would recommend, since Brussels they don't really have a flat surface, so they're a little bit harder to cut, whereas the onion, you can get it on a flat surface and it stays pretty still. I wouldn't recommend that young kids are doing this piece. I would recommend that either teenagers or the adults in the household are cutting this one. But we're just going to halve up these Brussels sprouts. And again, we're going to roast them. You could honestly keep these whole. So if we're looking just to make it as simple and fast as possible, you could wash the Brussels sprouts. These are already pre-washed. Rinse them off and then leave them whole and just spread them out on our roasting pan as well. So we're going to be doing about half and half today. Brussels sprouts do count as some of your veggie intake for the day. They are very high in fiber. So again, very good for the digestive tract. That green color also contains antioxidants that are great for our health as well. This one tends to be a very polarizing vegetable, I would say. People either really like it or they really don't like it. So if you haven't tried Brussels sprouts before, I would recommend actually going to a restaurant and trying them there first, because they tend to know how to cook them to where they've got the most flavor and they're most accepted there. And then we can experiment with them at home into incorporating these into our recipes and finding the flavors that we really like. So we're just going to take those Brussels. So we're going to do about half with them cut in half. And I'm going to add a few more whole Brussels on here as well. Now, one thing to note is if you are doing this like I am, where you're using half of them whole and half of them that are halved, the cooking is going to vary a little bit on those. So your half Brussels are going to get crispier in order to get your whole Brussels cooked all the way. So as long as you're okay with some ultra crispy Brussels sprouts, which is my personal favorite, you're welcome to kind of mix it up. Or again, just leave them all whole, so then they're all cooking very evenly for you. Okay, next ingredient we have is sweet potato. Now, this sweet potato, you'll notice, is cut up into small pieces. It's actually still got a little ice on it because I want to make this recipe very easy and kid-friendly to make. So I purchased frozen pre-cut sweet potato. If you've ever tried to cut a sweet potato or a squash on your own, you know it's not a safe task. So rather than us trying to actually create more work and having to cut that up for the kids for them to be able to put that on the recipe, just buy it frozen. It makes your life easier, and then your kid can be totally involved and totally in charge of measuring out the portion and getting that ready. So sweet potato, we're just going to add that onto our sheet again for roasting. So this is a cup of sweet potato. I love the orange color of sweet potato. That orange color is indicative of it being high in beta carotene, which is really great for our skin and for our eyes. So that's another plant-based chemical that we get benefits from. That's not a necessary nutrient. Our butternut squash is next. And again, I chose this one because it's easier to find in a pre-cut frozen option. So again, we're not going to cut our fingers off trying to cut a butternut squash or an acorn squash. We're just going to take the already pre-cut option and spread that out. Squash is going to give us some extra potassium, a little bit of vitamin C, and again, that great beta carotene color. So this is going to be a really pretty, colorful dish. You can see from our tray here, we've got lots of different colors. So our next step, once we get all of the veggies on the tray, we are going to take some olive oil and drizzle that on top. If you really like to get it mixed really evenly, you could also put this in a bowl and make sure it's mixed that way. I'm a big fan of using my hands, which is why we washed our hands before. So we're just going to pour that olive oil on and mix it around. And your kids will love this if they're helping as well. Just really make sure that hands are clean before we dig into this food here. Okay, we've got everything mixed into our olive oil here. I'm just going to grab my towel to wipe my hands off. we're gonna add half of our spice mixture. So again, we've got a mixture of thyme, basil, and sage. These are great aromatics. It smells delicious whenever you're cooking it, and it tastes really good once the finished product is ready. So we're just gonna sprinkle about half of our spices directly onto our veggies here. All right, and next step is just popping it in the oven. So we're gonna roast these for about 20 to 30 minutes total. We're gonna put the timer on, go ahead and let it roast. While it's roasting, we can get ready with our bread. So for the bread, this is a really big loaf of bread. We only need about half of this, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut this one in half. The nice thing about this bread option is that you really don't need a knife for it. So if you've got younger children that want to help and you wanna get them interested in food in general, this is a great activity for them. So what we're gonna do is just tear it in about 1-inch pieces. So again, really fun to just get in there and tear it up. And it doesn't have to be uniform. You'll see once it's done. It's actually kind of nice to get some bigger pieces and some smaller pieces because it'll cook a little bit differently for the pieces. So the bigger pieces end up getting more soaked with the broth. And they've got this really nice, like creamy taste and texture to them. Whereas the smaller pieces will get a little crispier. Same pieces on the top will get a little bit crispier, whereas the pieces on the bottom will be a little bit more soggy, which sounds disgusting, but it's actually really delicious. It's got that nice like chicken broth or vegetable broth flavor once we get that done. So we're tearing everything up. And then once we get that finished, we're gonna go ahead and put that into our casserole dish. So I've just got a 9x13 pan here. We're gonna go ahead and add this right in. You don't need to spray your 9x13 pan with cooking spray, but I like to just as a just in case and to make it a little easier for cleanup. So we're gonna do a quick little spray on that one and add our bread in. Okay, so our bread's all ready to go in the pan. We're gonna pretend like our veggies have been in there for a while, and so those are ready. We're gonna go ahead and pop those out of the oven and add those in. So we're just gonna add them evenly over the bread. I wish you guys could smell it because it smells really good, and it hasn't even been baking for very long. All right, so we've got our veggies, we've got our bread in here. So again, a pro tip that you can use for this recipe is if you prefer that like really creamy stuffing texture, put your bread on the bottom because that's gonna soak up more of the broth as we add that in. And you're gonna have this like really nice creamy recipe. If you want it to be a little bit more crispy, let your veggies sit on the bottom and add your bread on top. And then that will help it get a little bit more crispy. It won't absorb quite as much of that broth. So we've got our butter here that we're going to add next. And what we're going to do with the butter is just dollop pieces over the top of this recipe. So what's going to happen is the butter is going to melt as we bake it. That's going to soak into the bread and add some extra flavor. Now, I am using, it's actually considered a margarine product. So this is a blend of butter and olive oil. So it's got 3 ingredients. It's butter, olive oil, and salt. I like it because it spreads like a margarine. So it's really easy to get out of the tub and spread onto toast or whatever you might be using it for. But it also reduces the saturated fat content of regular butter. So we end up getting some more monounsaturated fats from the olive oil, as well as still getting that butter flavor and some of that yummy saturated fat from the butter. You can use whichever product you like. So if you have regular butter at home and you would prefer to use that, that's perfectly fine. If you have a different margarine product, that's fine too. The portions will remain the same as what's listed on the recipe. So we've got the butter dolloped on top. We're gonna add the rest of our seasonings in. So just kind of sprinkle that evenly onto the recipe. And then we're gonna top everything with our broth. So again, this is going to soak into the bread to create that stuffing texture that we all love. Now this broth, I have chosen a low sodium broth. So there's 3 different options in the broth section. You have the regular option, which will just say chicken broth or vegetable broth. You've got a reduced sodium option. So that means the sodium's been reduced from what it typically is. That's a better option generally, because usually the regular broth has quite a bit of sodium. And then we also have a low sodium option. So low sodium is defined having less than 200 milligrams of sodium for per serving of that product. I tend to prefer more of the reduced sodium because it's still got a little extra salt, so it adds some more flavor. And if we've got active individuals who are going to be eating this, we're really not too concerned about having too much salt if we're sweating on a regular basis and really expending a lot of energy. So you can choose the product that's going to work best for you and your family. So this is all ready to go. We are going to cover it before we put it in the oven again. Cover that, and then we're going to put it back in the oven covered for about 30 minutes. And then once it's baked for that 30 minutes, the timer goes off, we're going to uncover it and cook it for an additional 10 minutes. That's what's going to let those top pieces of the bread get a little bit extra crispy for us. So I will show you our finished recipe that we have here. Ta-da! This is what it looks like at the end. So it's delicious. I can say I did some quality checking of this recipe. So that's a pro tip as well. If you ever need to try something, cake, other recipes that you're cooking, if you really need to try it and make sure it tastes delicious, it's called a quality check. So if you've made the recipe and your parents are upset that you've taken a bite out of it, just let them know that you were quality checking it to make sure it was fine for the rest of the family. But again, this smells really great. It's got tons of veggies in there, so it's a great way to get some antioxidants in your veggie servings in. And then we've got the bread in here as well for the extra carbohydrate. So I hope you guys enjoy making this recipe and you've got something really yummy as well as healthy to bring to your Thanksgiving table. Happy Thanksgiving. And if you would like to get in touch with me for any questions on this recipe or any other nutrition-based questions, please contact me at sportsnutrition@childrenscolorado.org.